Alright, here's our video today. The science of the Gregorian calendar. And that's the calendar we use today. But of course it wasn't always the calendar we used. We used to use the Julian calendar. Well, not America. Well, actually, yes, American. The American colonies used the Julian calendar. But we'll talk all about that. And we'll talk about the science behind it. Why they had to change it. So what you're looking here in red right there is Pope Gregory the 13th, and he's the one where they named the calendar after, right? And of course, the one in this kind of blackish robe over there, that's Ignazio Danti. So let's write this down. So over here, we'll say it's Pope Gregory, hence the name. Pope Gregory the 13th. There we go, right there. In red and in black. And Pope Gregory at the time, he's like 80 years old at this time. And then we have Ignazio. That's how you say it, Ignazio. Even though in English it doesn't sound like that, right? But the proper way is Ignazio. Ignazio Danti. And he's like 46 at this time. So, Ignazio Danti was the ultimate Renaissance man. And he was born in 1536, died in 1586. So he was essentially the Pope's chief science officer. And he's going to prove to the Pope that the old calendar, the old Julian calendar, was out of date. So, in the late 1500s, the Julian calendar was used since Julius Caesar, right? And so Julius Caesar and his science advisors, they calculated the year. When they calculated the year of the solar year, our year. So under the Julian calendar, we'll put Julian over here. The Julian calendar, the year was 365.25 days, which is very close to ours. But under the new calendar, the Gregorian, calendar, and this may seem so trivial to us, but it's 365.242 days. And you're saying, well, come on, that's nothing. But again, decimals mean something. And what this meant is that every year there was 11 minutes difference, which again doesn't really seem to mean anything, right? But by the time of when they're in this room here on top of the Vatican, they're in the Tower of Winds, which we'll talk about, there was a 10-day era. So Ignazio, right? He had to tell the Pope that the calendar, the Julian calendar, is off by 10 days. And why is that important? Well, just think about it. Especially when you're talking about the Catholic Church, they have to, for Easter especially, they need to know when their spring equinox is. And if it's 10 days off, they're not going to know when that happens. And by the way, if we didn't correct the Julian calendar, we would be off by 14 days today. So we'll talk about how Pope Gregory how Ignazio Danti convinced Pope Gregory that the Julian calendar was wrong. And in this video, of course, we have to do some trigonometry because this is the science behind it. And of course, you can't do science without math. So we will do some trig functions, and I'll just do some basic trig functions. If you need to know more about trig functions, well, I have videos on that. I'll put a link in down there. So this room, by the way, I'll write it over here, right? It's the hall of the meridian. So let me find my pen. We'll use that. This is called, by the way, there's the oculus, but let's write it over here. The hall, Pope Gregory had this commission to build this, the hall of the meridian. That's the room. And the hall of the meridian was on top of a tower called the Tower of the Winds. And this specific room inside the tower is where Dante installed the floor you're seeing in this picture. He's installing this floor. And of course, there's the oculus where the sun will get in. And of course, you see the walls are covered with these beautiful frescoes and paintings. And these paintings, by the way, do show the wind, the seasons, and the power of the church over time. And if you want to find the Tower of the Winds today, well, it's in the Vatican. It's in the Vatican complex. I'll show you. It's actually about a 14-minute walk from St. Peter's Square. However, tourists can't just walk there. Just can't walk there. But you could see it. Let me show you a picture. So there's St. Peter's Basilica right here. And this, of course, you're looking at the Tower of the Wind. Put my pen right there. This is the Tower of the Wind. And of course, the top room, very top room would have been the Hall of the Meridian, where Danti, a long time ago, performed his experiment. Not Danti, by the way, the author, but Ignazio. I mean Ignazio, right? You can't put a T in there. Ignazio. Now, to run this experiment, so Danti created a hole, called the oculum, the eye, right? Oculum is the eye. And where's my pen? Got to get that pen going. So right over here is the oculum, which is the eye, and you can see the sunlight coming right through. And if it's just right, on the spring equinox, it would hit a certain spot on the wall. And he kept the room dark, obviously, so you can see more of the sunlight. And we're almost ready for trigonometry. So what Danti did, if we can make this room, right, let's say that's the wall in the Hall of the Meridian, and this is the floor. So he knew that he had to make a hole in the wall there. And it had to be at a certain angle. It had to be at a 48-degree angle. And let's change the color, and I'll tell you why it had to be 48 degrees. So, and of course, the ray on the equinox, it would land at a certain spot. And if it wasn't at that spot, that means the calendar would have been off, which he did show to Pope Gregory. So why 48 degrees? Why 48 degrees? So in Rome, where the Vatican technically is, it's its own city, but in Rome, the latitude is 42 degrees north. So we'll say 42 degrees north latitude. Like if you were in New York, for example, it's around 41. So in the spring equinox, you would say 90 degrees minus 48, minus 42 that is, and you'll get 48 degrees. Now, why 90? Well, in the spring equinox, at the equator, it'll be exactly 90 degrees. The sun will be 90 degrees up in the sky, shining down. So, using logic then, as you move up in latitude, the sun will never reach 90 degrees in the spring equinox. It will reach 48 degrees. So that's why he put the 48 there. And how did he get 48? Well, he minused the 90 degrees at the equator minus the degree latitude of Rome, and he came up with 48 degrees. So he knows that this angle has to be 48 degrees coming straight down. The light will come in straight down. So here in this oculus, this light is coming down at 48 degrees. And it's hitting right here. And right here, if it's hitting, this is where he marked out where the sun should hit on the spring equinox. And also in fall too, exactly the same time, twice a year. So again, the concept is solar noon too. Let me just write that, solar noon. That's the highest point in the sky the sun could be, depending on the latitude and the year. So we know that in the spring equinox in Rome, the highest the sun could get at noon is 48 degrees. And at 48 degrees, its highest degree mark, it will make that angle, 48 degrees, landing at a certain spot. So to do trigonometry, you need to know the height of the wall, and you also need to know where to mark this spot. Where to mark this spot? How do you know? So what you needed to know the distance also of where this is coming, so he could mark the spot. And if the sunlight hits that spot, then he knows that is true. Well, then he knows that that's the right date. So, by the way, we should write the year here, right? And this is what happens if the date is wrong. In the Julian calendar, you can see it's wrong. It has to be, the sunlight has to be here, but it's off. And what Dante showed, he showed the Pope that was off by 10 days. He showed it was off by 10 days, 10 days off. And of course, the Pope was also getting information from other people. So Dante just proved it using light. He said the sun never lies. So again, it should be here, and then they said it was 10 days off. So the Pope said, wow, we have to definitely change this. And basically he was saying to the Pope, the sun doesn't care about human calendars. So when he came back 10 days later, just to show that on March 21st, it was right there, shining right there. And we'll go back to that picture. It's hitting the spot exactly where it should be. Now let's go into more of the math now and the trigonometry. And again, if you don't know trigonometry, I have videos on it, but I'll just try to make a brief primer on it anyway. So with trigonometry, you use triangles. And let's make sure we're having a pen ready here. So let's say this was the wall, right? And this was the floor. He needed to know, of course, how far away should it be based on an angle of 48 degrees. He knew it had to be 48 degrees, this angle. And he could have used that. Of course, we can use a protractor today to get that degree. But he knew it had to be 48 degrees. So this would be the this would be the wall. We'll say the height of the wall. And this, of course, would be the distance of the floor. So with trigonometry, there's certain ratios. There's certain trig ratios. And the one we're going to use today is tan. Because tan, the ratio for tan is opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. So let's change the color here. So opposite of what? Well, opposite the degree. So opposite to the degree, right there, that's the opposite. Right? So that's the opposite, whatever that could be. And adjacent, right? This is adjacent. Right? So opposite over adjacent. So we already know that we're going to use a ratio of tan 48 degrees. Fix that, 8, tan 48 degrees. Tan 48 degrees, and of course, Dante did not have a TI-84 or, plus calculator. He had to use trig ratios. He had to use ratio columns that were already in place by other mathematicians. But anyway, tan 48 will be what the wall height is, which he knew was 16 feet. What he's trying to find is D. So all you have to do is just know what tan 48 degrees is. And if you plug that into your calculator now, you would have to divide down, right? 16 divided by tan 48, and you would get the distance of about 14.4 feet. Of course, he couldn't have done it that way. He had to use trig columns. But he did come up with 14.4 feet, and that's exactly this distance. That's where he marked the spot. And so if the calendar was correct on March 21st, the sunlight would hit exactly that spot, which it did on March 21st. But according to the Julian calendar, it was 10 days before. And so that's what convinced the Pope, we got to act. And just to show you what Dante had, so he was trying to find the distance, but he had the wall of 16 feet. He was dividing it by what tan 48 was on the columns, and that was 1.1106. So he just did 16 divided by that, and he came up with the distance of 14.4, actually 0.406 feet. That's how he came up. So just using trigonometry, he came up with that distance. And so what did the Pope do? He just, the Gregorian calendar was created, and he basically just erased 10 days from history in the Catholic countries. In the Protestant countries, they did not accept this for a while. So, and at the time, Shakespeare's around. He's about 18. Galileo's the same age. He's 18. The Protestants and the Orthodox Church did not accept it. England did not accept it until 1752, and Germany did not accept it to 1700. And when I say England, it was also England and the colonies. So in America at the time, Benjamin Franklin would have known about the change in the 1700s when they changed it. And he was using his brilliant satire to explain an old man waking up 10 days later for a nice rest. But anyway, that's our video today on the science of the Gregorian calendar.